All right. We left off talking about finishing up with the 6th house last week. So I think we should start today with the 7th house.
上周我们讲完了前6宫，今天我们从第7宫开始。
All right. When we've made it through these first 6 houses, it's much like, in a way, the first 6 signs of the zodiac.
当我们穿过从1宫到第6宫时，这就有点像我们穿越了前面的6个星座一样。
Looks like I've got a question already. Is that a question for me?
No.
Okay. All right. Good. Because the 6 houses that are 1 through 6 are much more about your private life.
那么前6宫，第1宫到第6宫，它更多的讲的是你的私生活。
If we think about it, it's similar in a way to the experience of those first 6 signs, because, and let me just say this before you translate, because we start off with the body, which is the 1st house.
那么它感觉就像黄道的前6个星座一样，这6个宫位，因为我们刚开始是从第1宫开始的，也就是说我们开始是始于我们的身体。
And we have my stuff, which is the 2nd house, things that I own, things that are mine.
然后就有了我的财产，我所拥有的东西，我的东西，这就是第2宫。
And in the 3rd house, we have my ideas, my neighborhood, my cousins.
那么到第3宫呢，就是我的想法，我的邻里，我的表兄表妹。
We have the 4th house, which is my home, my family, my apartment.
那么然后就是第4宫，我的家，我的家人，我的公寓。
And the 4th house can also, mean children, but the 5th house also can refer to some things about children or what I create.
那么第4宫当然也意味着孩子，不过第5宫也代表着孩子，而且还有一个是我创造了什么，这是第5宫。
But the 5th house is also my play.
那么第5宫也是我的游乐，我的游戏。
And then the 6th house is my schedule, my routine, my job.
那么第6宫是我的日程表，我的常规的事情，我的工作。
Once we get to the 7th house, even though there are also some relationships, certainly important relationships, that are below the horizon. We have the 3rd house relationships and the 4th house relationships and even the 6th house relationships in terms of co-workers. But something changes when we hit the 7th house.
然后到第7宫的时候呢，就有些事情发生了变化，特别就关系层面。虽然说在前6宫也有跟关系相关的，比方说跟第3宫是我们跟我们的兄弟姊妹、表兄弟表姊妹，第4宫跟我们的家人，第5宫跟我们的孩子，第6宫跟我们的同事，但是第7宫的这个关系发生了变化。
We really begin in the 7th house through partnership and companionship to enter into relationships out in the world.
到了第7宫，我们通过合伙关系、伙伴关系，我们1对1的亲密关系，我们进入了和这个世界的关系。
Now, when I first got into astrology, the old books would call the 7th house the house of marriage and companionship but also open enemies.
那么，当我开始学占星的时候，那个老的教科书上说，第七宫是我们的同伴，我们的婚姻，同时他还指出这是我们的公开的敌人。
Notice this is not hidden enemies, this is open enemies.
你要注意到，他说的是公开的敌人，而不是隐蔽的敌人。
And I think in some cases we see why this is true, don't we? Because of the way people sometimes behave when a relationship breaks up or a married couple goes through a divorce. Sometimes they will, for a while, become like open enemies.
我们也理解为什么他们这么说，因为当我们的一段关系破裂，或者是一对夫妇我们离婚的时候，那么有一段时间，这个关系看起来两个人就像一对公开的敌人一样。
And the seventh house is all about the beginning of developing relationships with others in terms of close, really close one-to-one relationships.
那么第七宫是我们开始发展和他人的关系，特别是那种非常亲密的关系。
In the seventh house, it also describes conditions of partnership, issues of partnership, even to some extent, things about a partner that you will tend to attract.
那第七宫它可以开始描述那个我们一个伙伴关系会有哪些样的条件，甚至还有它会是什么样的伙伴关系的这个伙伴关系的性质，甚至是描述出来你倾向于吸引来什么样的伙伴。
Now, the seventh house is not the complete answer to relationship questions. It's one of the important areas, but not the only.
那么第七宫并不是它完整的描述了我们的伙伴关系，它是一个非常重要的组分，但并不是唯一的组分。
Let me give you an example of how this works.
我给大家一个例子，看看你们是怎么看的。你们可以看到是怎么运作的。
The seventh house can mean partnership, both in terms of marriage and business partnership. And I'm going to give you an example of this.
那么第七宫它意味着伙伴关系，它不仅是婚姻中的这种两口子，还包括商业的伙伴关系。我给大家一个例子。
Most of you know the astrologer Jeff Jower.
你们大多数人都知道杰夫焦尔。
Jeff Jower's first wife was a Libra.
杰夫焦尔的第一任太太是一个天秤座的人。
And he has Aries rising, Libra on the descendant. So Libra is the sign in his seventh house.
那么他的上升点是白羊座，他的下降点，他的第七宫宫头是天秤座，所以说呢，他的第一个妻子是一个天秤座的人。
Jeff also has the planet Neptune in the seventh house.
杰夫杰夫的第七宫里面还有海王星。
And so his first wife was a Libra.
所以说他的第一个太太是一个天秤座的人。
Her son fell in his seventh house, house of partnership.
而且他第一任太太的太阳落在了杰夫的第七宫，伴侣宫。
I was in partnership in business with Jeff for 4 years.
我和杰夫，我们两个作为商业伙伴，我们一块儿做了4年。
And Jeff used to refer to me as his second Libra wife.
原来杰夫总是说我是他的第2位天秤座老婆。
Jeff, however, would eventually marry and have 2 daughters with a woman he would meet in France, who is a double Pisces, sun and moon in Pisces.
那后来呢，杰夫又娶了另外一位太太，并且跟这位太太生了2位女儿。那么这位太太呢，她是一个双鱼座的人，她的太阳和月亮都在双鱼座。
Now, this shows the importance of a planet in the 7th house. In this case, Neptune in the 7th house in Jeff's chart, showing his attraction of a Neptune person. In the case, his wife and the mother of their children, who is a Pisces.
那么这个例子也让我们看到7宫里面行星的重要。那么在他的杰夫焦耳的7宫里是海王星，那么他吸引来一个双鱼座的女人，这个女人成为了他的妻子，也成为他2个孩子的母亲。
Now, there are other ways this can happen.
那么像这种情况还可能以其他的方式来发生。
My first marriage, let me say this first, Felicia. In my chart, the planet Uranus is in the 7th house.
那么在大卫老师的星图中，他的7宫宫头，不是7宫里面落了一颗天王星。
And my first wife was born with Uranus exactly conjunct the ascendant.
那么我的第1任太太，她的星图上天王星准确合上升点。
And then I had a long-time girlfriend of 10 years who was an Aquarius.
然后我又有一个长达10年的女朋友，那么这位女朋友她是水瓶座。
And my wife now, of the last 14 years, has Uranus conjunct the ascendant in Leo. Uranus right on the ascendant.
那么我的现任太太，我跟她有了14年婚姻的现任太太，她的天王星也是合向上升点，合向在狮子座。
And so, what is in 7th house is often descriptive, to some extent, of the partner or the kind of partner that we attract, become involved with. It's not the only factor, but it is something that should be rather obvious most of the time.
那么所以说第7宫的性质，还有第7宫落在第7宫的行星，都向我们描述了我们倾向于吸引来的这个伴侣。那当然它不是唯一的一个指征，不过常常我们可以从第7宫看出一些端倪来。
Now we have a question here. Yes, let me answer the second question first. Mayudan, if there's no planet in the 7th house, should we refer to the sign of that house? The answer is yes. Judo.
那么这位同学问，如果第7宫没有行星落在第7宫，是不是我们就要看第7宫的星座？是的，是这样。
Now, there was a question about animals belonging to the 6th house and not the 7th.
那么另外一个同学问，为什么我们的宠物是第6宫而不是第7宫呢？这位同学说，对他来说，他的狗就像他的伴侣一样，像一个灵魂的伙伴。有的人把他们的狗还有猫看作。
I think the 6th house association is more when when pets served a working purpose. For example, people had cats to catch mice. They had dogs to perform working functions.
那么我们当初把第六宫跟宠物连在一起，是因为当时的那些小动物实际上是为人们工作的。比如说，我们养只猫是为了它抓老鼠，我们养只狗是为了让它干一些活儿。
I think the kind of relationship that we have with pets in the modern world is much more of a 12th house relationship in a way.
我觉得在现代世界，我们和我们宠物的这样一个关系，可能更有点像12宫的关系。
And that 12th house relationship, as all of us know who have pets or have had pets, is more one of unconditional love.
那么我们所有有宠物的人，可能都能感觉到我们和宠物的那种好像无条件的爱这样的关系。这是我是把它
It is really, in a way, more of a spiritual connection in many ways.
我们和宠物之间有那种灵性的连接。
Right. I like what Jovine is saying, by the way. Yes, that's right. It's not the planet that's in charge. Absolutely.
主办说，这些深刻的连接可能导致正面的或者负面的态度，那么是由我们来选择到底怎么样对待另外一半，是我们而不是行星来决定。
Yes, very good. All right. So the 7th house is obviously, it's one of the cardinal houses in a way. It's part of the angles because we have the 1st house is self, me. The 4th house, my home. 7th house, my partner, my marriage, my partnership.
是一个基本宫的宫位，那么它是第一宫是我，第4宫是我的家庭，那么第7宫呢是我的伴侣，它是一个轴线的这个位置非常重要。Also, one question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Please go ahead. I'll ask the question later.
You sure? Okay. All right. And so the 7th house, in many ways, is the complement to the 1st house. The descendant is the complement to the ascendant.
所以说，从很多方面来讲，第7宫是和第1宫的互补，它帮我们完整了这个我们的自我，让我们自我变得完整。
If you have Gemini rising, you want someone who has Sagittarius to complement that.
如果你的上升是双子座，你希望有一个射手座的人帮你变得完整，跟你互补。
If you have Cancer on the ascendant, then Capricorn is on the descendant. You want a partner who is going to represent Capricorn in some way in your life.
那么如果你的上升是巨蟹座，你希望你找到一个伴侣，他有摩羯座的性质，他在生活中代表那个摩羯座的有摩羯座的面相。
There's an old saying, and this will get me into a brief discussion. Oh, tell Olivia no, that's not true.
Could you finish because the other question.
That's an old yeah. I will. Hold on. I want to go back to what it is I want to say. In English, there's an old saying that opposites attract. Do you have the same saying in Chinese, Felicia?
Yes. 那么 英语中有这种谚语是相反者性格相反的人互相吸引。
Now, that is only partially true.
那么这个呢，只是有一部分是这样的。
But the ascendant and the descendant, the first house versus the seventh house, this is part of that dynamic of opposites attracting, where you have in your partner something that is a complement to you.
那么，但是呢，第一宫和第七宫，它是也在描述这样一个现象，就是你的相反的这两个星座的性质，它们互相吸引，因为它能够弥补、能够互补你的一部分。
However, let me point out something that is very important.
但是我要跟大家指出一个非常重要的一点来，在关系中的。
Most long-time relationships, most important relationships and marriages are with people that we have more in common with than we do different.
在大多数长久的关系中，那么我们是和更像我们的人，而不是和更不像我们的人在一起，这样的婚姻是更长久的。
However, those places where we have differences or where we are opposite each other also creates a necessary tension in the relationship that keeps the relationship from being boring or too complacent.
但是这个在关系中两人不相像的部分，是给我们关系带来一些紧张感，带来一些压力。但是正是因为这个，让我们的这个婚姻不那么沉闷，不那么着好像是太心满意足了。
So in terms of compatibility, there may be 75 to 80% of things that you share that are in common in some way or simple and very easily compatible, and maybe 20 to 25% to where there are opposite differences.
那所以说，在一个长久的关系中，可能两个人的相似之处有75%到80%，只有20%到25%的部分是两个人是不相同的。
This is sort of what I've seen as a common denominator for reasonably successful relationships.
这是我看到的那些。
Okay, all right. Now, I think we can get to the questions, Felicia.
Okay. First question is that if someone has Saturn and Uranus all in seventh house, does that mean she will attract a companion that has split, or because one stable and also want to change, or does that mean she will marry twice?
First off, or the sign that is in your seventh house, it is not about fate. It doesn't work that way. Just like the question about Gemini on the descendant, meaning two marriages. That's what we call an old wives' tale, meaning is a superstition.
首先，如果有两个性质相反的行星落在第七宫，或者是不是说肯定要离婚等等，这就像刚才另外一个同学问的，是不是下降点是双子座，意味着是要2次婚姻？这都是过去的迷信的说法。没有。And
I'll give you an example of what I mean. I'm going to talk about the Saturn Uranus. I'll talk about the Saturn Uranus in the 7th in just a minute. But just yesterday, a famous actor named Mickey Rooney, who was 93 years old, died here in the United States.
那么昨天有位非常著名的美国演员叫 Mickey Rooney， 他97岁了，他昨天过世了。
He had won a couple of Academy Awards.
他获了好几个
No.
奖项。
Yes. Now, Mickey Rooney had been married 8 times.
Mickey Rooney 这个人，他结了8次婚。
And there's no way, looking at his chart, you could predict that he would be married 8 times.
如果你看他的星图，你无法预测出他会结8次婚。
It wasn't like the number 8 was hidden in there somewhere.
他的星图中并没有隐藏着一个数字8在那里。
All right. Let's go back to what does it mean if you have Saturn and Uranus in the 7th? It means that you need that both of those are going to be issues in your partnership, in your marriage, and that both of those will be represented in the people you attract.
如果你的第7宫中落了土星和天王星，意味着什么呢？它意味着这2个行星都意味着你的婚姻中存在这2个行星所代表的问题，也说明你吸引来的人需要有这2个行星的这种特质，都要存在在一个人身上。
It means, for example, that you might be attracted to someone who we call a maverick, someone who goes about living their life in a very independent or original way.
这意味着你会吸引来一个特立独行的人，他非常的独立，他的生活方式非常的独特。
However, this person may be someone who also has a strong sense of duty or responsibility, someone who is serious about commitment.
但是呢，这个人他又是一个对于责任和义务非常认真的人，他对于承诺也非常看重。
They might even be someone that says, I don't want to get married just because I'm supposed to, but you know I am committed to you. You know I am serious.
他可能会对你说，我不想因为结婚而结婚，你知道我对你是认真的，我对你是有承诺的。
Now, is there another question?
Another question, I think it's English.
Was it? I have to scroll up, so let me see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. 3 planets in the 7th. Saturn. I don't really think of Saturn too much. And I've seen, because of the way things were with your generation, I've seen your people. Seen a lot of that.
Excuse me, I lost you just now.
Oh, I just said there's a generation, a little subgroup of young people that have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all. So a lot of them will have those planets in the 7th house, and it means that each one of those is represented in partner and in the partnership.
那么有一个年龄段的人，他们的土星、天王星、海王星就是在一起的，也就意味着其实有很多人他们的这3颗行星都会做来第7宫，这个意味着就是你的伴侣身上要存在这3个行星的特质。
I mean, it could even manifest in another way. The person that has Saturn and Uranus in the 7th house might attract somebody who is an Aquarius with the moon in Capricorn.
那它可以别的方式表现出来，比方说你的这个宫里面落了土星和天王星，它可能吸引来一个月亮摩羯座，但是太阳水瓶座的人。
It might be as literal as someone with the the Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in the 7th, attracting a partner that has some Aquarius, some Capricorn, and some Pisces. This kind of combination.
那这个有土、天、海落在第7宫的人，他可能会吸引来一个星盘中有摩羯座、水瓶座、双鱼座特色的人。
Okay. All right. Now, we could easily spend the rest of this course, every webinar, just on relationships.
那我们可以就是每节课都讲关系啊，但是这是不可能的。刚才我补充一下，他说的那个人，他说的那个有些人生在那一年的人都有这样的，但是这个组合不一定落在第7宫啊。
Of course, we love this topic. Yes. But let me mention one more thing, and then we will move to the 8th house.
那么我们再提最后一点，然后我们就要讲第8宫了。
Okay. The 7th house is also sometimes what we will project onto others.
那第7宫有时候是我们把我们的投射到他人身上的。
If we have Neptune in the 7th, we may see our partner or others as being too sensitive, too confused, too confusing. Why do I attract such complicated people?
那比如说，我们如果有海王星落在第7宫，我们可能常吸引来一些看上去迷迷糊糊的人。有时候你可能说，我怎么老吸引来这种这么复杂的人呢
？But we need to own our own need for that. See, to recognize that it's part of us, not just the other person.
但是最重要的是，我们应该认出来那种特质不仅仅是那个人的特质，它也是我们内在的某种特质。我们应该去拥有那个特质，而不是只是把它投射在外面。
Okay, that's important.
这是非常非常重要的。
Recognize that 7th house that you have doesn't belong to someone else. That is your 7th house.
非常重要的是，我们所拥有的那个第7宫，它不是别人的第7宫，这是我们自己的第7宫。
Right. Yes, the sign on the house is very important. And any other sign in that house is a factor also, but it's the sign on the cusp, often the most important. But the other signs will influence it.
那么第7宫
I'm answering Helen's question.
星座也是非常重要的。那就是说第7宫内的这个星座是很重要的，但最重要的是第7宫宫头的星座。
Okay. The 8th house. The 8th house is the second most important house in terms of relationships, partnership, marriage. Very important.
那么第8宫是就关系、婚姻，我们的伴侣合伙关系来说，第2重要的宫位，非常重要。
In the 7th house, we make an agreement to be in a relationship. In the 7th house, we get married.
那么在第7宫的时候，我们结婚了。
But the 8th house will show what happens after the marriage, what happens on the night of the honeymoon, what happens when it comes to dealing with money.
那么第8宫是婚姻发生了什么？就是我们的钱财又出了什么样的事情，我们是怎么样处理钱财的，这个跟第8宫相关。
such an important house, the 8th house is.
这是一个非常非常重要
You
的
can
星
see
座。
from the, it's one of the key houses that deals with sexual issues, intimacy. It's everything about the bonding process with couples.
这是一个非常重要的就亲密关系，还有一对夫妇他们的连接的这个过程，形成连接的过程的宫位。
And so it has to do with partners' money or shared money, borrowed money, loan money, taxes, insurance, inheritance. You can see this list of things we associate with the 8th house.
所以说，它跟别人的钱财、合伙人的钱财、共有的物品、借款或贷款、税务、保险、遗产等等这些联系在一起。
The 8th house is really a crisis house, isn't it?
第7宫真的是一个危机宫位。
Can I trust my partner to be there for me in a crisis?
当发生危机的时候，我能不能信任我的伴侣还会在那里陪着我？
For example, married couple with children, the wife wants to know, can I trust my husband to take care of the kids? I have to leave to take care of my mother who is sick and dying.
那么，比方说这个老婆会想这个，我去照看我生病的要过世的母亲的时候，我们能不能信任把我的孩子留给我老公呢？
Right. And so the 8th house, like the sign Scorpio, like the planet Pluto,
所以第8宫就像天蝎座和冥王星一样。
Now, think about this. We know that the 8th house is associated with sex, which on one level is not only about bonding, but also about procreation that creates another human life.
我们知道第8宫是关于连接的，那么这个连接不仅是通性的连接，而且是要去繁衍后一代。
This makes 8th house very powerful, because it's about the continuation of passing on of your genes and your DNA.
这是非常非常有力量的，因为这意味着你把你的基因传下去。
Obviously, your genes will be what your progeny inherits.
毫无疑问，你的基因就会成为你传给后代的这个遗产。
And so you can think of the 8th house as not only inheritance, but also legacy.
那么第8宫呢，它不仅是你继承的东西，你从父母那儿继承的东西，而且还是你传给下一代的遗产。
The sign on the 8th house and or a sign in the 8th house will tell you about in terms of intimacy and bonding.
那么第7宫宫头的星座，还有第8宫宫头的星座，还有第8宫内的星座，会向你描述刚才所说的这些东西，就比如说你的亲密感啊，等等等等。
The planets in the 8th house will also tell you something about intimacy issues and trust issues.
那么第8宫内所做的行星也会向你描述，你们的亲密感之间会出什么的问题，还有亲密感的问题。
When you think about transformation, rebirth, metamorphosis, how do these things come about in our lives? How does that happen?
那么当你想这个我们重生，还有 when you think about rebirth and transformation， 当你想
metamorphosis，
转化的时候，转变的时候，变形的时候，你会想到什么呢？
There are some very natural, normal ways in life that we will experience this.
那么在人生中有一些非常自然的这种转变的阶段，转变。
When you lose a partner, whether they abandon you, divorce you, or die, you are
当你失去了
you are experiencing something very intense, so much so that you will say, I feel like I could die, or I want to.
当我们失去一位伴侣，不论是他们抛弃了你，还是他们过世了，那么你都在经历一个非常激烈的这样的情感阶段。那么你甚至有时候会说，我感觉我都想要去死。
And so, when we go through this experience of grieving, we go through a process that can transform us.
所以说，当我们经历那个哀伤的过程的时候，我们也在经历一个要转化我们的过程。
When we are in the we feel intensely painful that we say things like, I will never love again.
那我们在那个激烈的情感中，我们在那样一种状态下，我们也会说出一些激烈的话，比如说，我觉得我再也不会去爱一个人了。
And yet, if we go through the whole process, it changes us. We are changed. We are transformed.
但是如果我们经历了整个过程，我们就转变了，我们就发生了转化。
And if you go through all of the stages of grieving and letting go in a healthy way, it will deepen your experience of life.
如果你经历哀伤的这几个阶段，那么你经历这整个的这样一个阶段，而且真正的放下，它就会加深你和生命之间的关系。
The reward of rebirth, the reward of transformation, is a more intimate relationship with life.
那么转化的给你的报偿，转化给你带来的酬劳，就是你能跟生命之间形成更亲密的关系。
Life will feel different. Life will look different.
那么生命和生活看起来就会完全不同，你对生命的感受也会完全不同。
Yes. And this is transformation, isn't it?
这就是转化，不是吗？
So I'm assuming this question from Yvonne about the 8th house. I'm assuming Mars, Neptune, and Uranus are in Capricorn. Is this correct?
这位同学，but there are questions. Yes, there are other questions that before that we cannot only answer students who ask English questions. Can I ask a question before that?
Then I expect you to be the one to alert me to that. All right?
Okay.
So go ahead.
And yeah, the first question is that can eighth house predict that how we die?
No.
那么第一个同学问，第八宫是不是能够暗示我们怎么死？老师说不是的。And it continued to ask whether eighth house cast in Sagittarius means you will die abroad or die in some way very religiously.
Maybe you will die laughing.
那么第八宫在射手座，老师说没准你会笑着死。
No, the eighth house, in my opinion, is not an indicator of die. How you will die is really not important. It's how you live that's important. Where you die, how you die, none of that really matters.
那么老师说，第八宫不是说描述我们是怎么死的，而且你怎么死也不重要，最重要的是你怎么活着，这才是重要的。
It's enough to know that you will die.
你知道你会死就行了，就足
And
够了。
that you will die and that if you are going to go through, you will die many times before you leave this world.
而且实际上，在你最终离开这个世界之前，你会以各种方式死去的。
So focus more on living. Don't worry about dying.
我们应该聚精会神的生活，而不应该去担心死亡。
You know, the whole chart, which you'll learn eventually, is about your health, for example, your physical health.
那么你的整个的星图，其实它都在表示了你的健康，你的身体的健康状况。
And there are many things in the chart that can help you to understand how to live in a more healthy way.
那么在星图上有很多都可以帮助你去理解如何以更健康的方式生活。
You can live longer, obviously, within your gene pool by discovering how to live a healthy life.
在你的家族的这个基因内，你可以通过了解到你可以活得更久，如果你知道如何过更健康的生活的话。
But you could be in very good health and still be run over by a bus.
但是呢，你可以好像很健康，但是还是会撞车就是发生交通事故而死。
You know, someone had an amazing life and who took great pains with his own body in terms of how his health and his diet. It was Gandhi.
那么实际上有这样一个人，他过了伟大的一生，但是呢，他what is health?
He took great pains with his health. In other words, he was a vegetarian. He was very careful about what he ate. He was very for religious reasons. But he was very into his body. Let me just say, when Gandhi was 62 years old, he could walk 12 miles. 12 miles, no problem.
刚才说，那有一位呢，他过了很伟大的一生，但实际上呢，他的饮食啊，还有什么的，都是给他身体，他其实是还有很多的痛苦的。不过呢，他还是很健康。然后他在62岁的时候呢，他一天能走12英里。
But his body is not what killed him. Somebody shot him.
但是最后不是他的身体让他最后死去，是他被刺杀了。
And to Olivia, for example, about Uranus, or you go ahead and tell me other questions about the 8th house.
Okay.
We've got to get away
Someone
from the thing about we will die.
我们不要再谈我们会怎么死了。Someone asked that, could you give some examples about 12th house because she felt a little bit abstract for her to understand it. Can you give some examples?
On the 12th house?
Oh, 8th house. I'm sorry, 8th house.
Okay. All right. Abstract. I don't think that any of these areas are abstract. Sex is not an abstract.
Yeah. She doesn't mean
unless you have areas.
For example, put a sign on 8th house or put a planet there. Give an example. She can more understand it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you have, for example, the sign Gemini, let's say, on the 8th house cusp, it means that what will turn you on about someone is their ability to talk and communicate their ideas. Things. This is very passionate.
那么，比如说，你的第8宫宫头是双子座，那么让你觉得很兴致盎然的，这个是这个人呢，他很会说，他的或者他的观点，就因为你会因为他很会说，而且是你因为他的一些观点，你会觉得就是被他在性上面所吸引。
And you can understand this very well if someone has Gemini on the 8th house cusp. Probably they have Taurus on the 7th cusp.
如果是这个人，他第8宫是双子座，那他的第7宫呢，很可能就是金牛座。
So they may attract a partner who provides comfort for them, perhaps who has money or a nice house.
那么他们可能吸引来一个能够给他提供物质满足感的人，那比方这个人很有钱，或者是有一个很好的房子。
And you know, this person with Taurus on the descendant has Scorpio rising, don't they?
那么这个如果是这个人，他如果是7宫是金牛座的话，那他上升就是天蝎座喽。
So you know that passion and intimacy and sex is important to them.
所以你知道这种激情、性，对他来说是非常重要的。
At the chart, and you see Gemini on the 8th house cusp.
但是你又看到8宫宫头是双子座。
And you know that what's going to turn them on is they might say, what really turned me on about the person is their voice, the way their voice sounds.
那么，但是呢，他可能会说，哎呀，那个人让我觉得一下子的那个就是非常欲火焚身的那种感觉，就是我听到他们的声音，他们的声音真是能够把我点燃了。
I love having deep conversations with them. I love just sitting and talking with them. I love talking.
他会说，哦，我喜欢我们之间深入的交谈，我就是特别喜欢跟他聊天。
After we talk, I feel attracted to them. I feel passionate.
那么，当我们聊了一会儿之后，我就会觉得我对他特别有激情，我觉得我就被他吸引了。
I recently had a client just this week who said that to me. She has Scorpio rising, Taurus obviously on the descendant, and Gemini on the 8th house.
那我这周就有一个客户，他正好有这个
described her husband, and she actually married a Gemini.
他实际上呢，他真的就嫁给了一个双子座的男人。
So eighth there is going to be what you're attracted to in someone. For example, suppose the sign Leo is on the 8th house cusp.
那么第八宫呢，也是说你会被什么样的人吸引？那么假如说第八宫宫头是狮子座，
Leo, you're going to be attracted to someone or turned on by the drama and the colorfulness of the individual.
那么你就会被那种戏剧化的而且多姿多彩的人，你会被他们吸引，你会因为就他们这样的话，你感觉到很性感。
You may even want the other person to be the one who is in charge to some extent when it comes to intimacy.
实际上，在你们发生性生活的时候，你可能还希望对方做主导，对方主导。
Let me give you an example.
给你
If you have Leo on the 8th house, it probably means you have Cancer on the 7th or descendant. So that's probably someone with Capricorn rising.
那么比如说，你如果是狮子座第5宫的话，你的巨蟹座就是第7宫，那么你上升点就可能是摩羯座。
And so here you have someone with Capricorn on the ascendant who seems very low-key, seems very conservative on the surface, formal.
那么这么一个上升摩羯座的人，看上去很低调，看上去非常保守，看上去非常的保守。
But maybe this is, for example, if we say this is chart of a male, maybe his wife is someone who takes charge when it comes to intimacy, and she dresses in a way that really turns him on, so that she's more colorful and more sets the stage for their passion, for their sex life, for example.
那么这个人呢，他可能在性关系中呢，他的妻子更是一个占主导性的人，可能他妻子穿的五彩缤纷的，就是说很戏剧化的那种表现，他有这样的性生活。
And so you see this Capricorn rising man who dresses kind of conservatively, but perhaps his wife wears something that's more colorful and more in some way.
那么你看到这样一个穿着保守的上升摩羯的男人，但是他的妻子呢，却打扮的色彩艳丽缤纷的这种样子。
She may also represent the Cancer on the 7th house, in that she is a good and very good to the family.
She's very good to the family.
Yeah, she's a good mother and very good with the family.
那么你可能还看到那个第7宫巨蟹座的那个部分，她是一个好妈妈，而且对家人都很好。
But when it comes to their intimacy, she's much more colorful and dramatic and more take charge in a way. You know, she said.
Oh, the platform. Hello?
The stage. I'm just starting to have fun here. What happened?
Oh,
can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. And so Leo in the 8th wants to create almost a private party with the other person. A private party. let's have some flowers and a bottle of wine, and let's dress up. See, this is Leo in the 8th.
那么第8宫头是狮子座，他在他的性生活，他可能就想要一个像一个私人的那种 party 一样，让我们打扮起来，让我们开香槟酒等等，这些就是这种
Now
有很多的庆祝的气氛。
Whatever planets the 8th house are also going to be trust issues that you have around those planets.
那么不论第8宫里面有什么样的行星，那么就围绕这些行星也都有信任的议题。
For example, if you have Uranus in the 8th house, you may have naturally fear that something sudden or unexpected would separate you from your partner.
比如说，你如果天王星落在第8宫，你可能就有一个担忧，你担忧会什么事情，一些突发事件会让你和你的另一半分手。
And so you may be someone who is concerned about the unexpected.
所以说，你可能非常担忧那些意料之外的事情。
With Neptune in the 8th house, on one hand, you may want a very high level of romance, even a spiritual intimacy with your partner, but you may have some trust issues about that. See.
那么，如果海王星在第8宫，一方面你很想那种非常浪漫的那种灵性的关系，但同时呢，你对于这个呢也有一些信任的议题。
Years ago, I had a client, I'm just remembering this, with Neptune in the 8th house, and she came to me because she had fallen in love with, or started to fall in love with her guru, with her spiritual teacher.
后呢，他来找我做咨询，那么他和他的一位上师之间发生了恋爱关系。
And she wanted to know if you could trust him.
他想知道他能不能信任那位上师。
Well, I looked at his chart also, and he had very strong Neptune and lots of Pisces, which is pretty suitable for a spiritual teacher, I think.
那么我也看了那位上师的星图，那他有很多的双鱼座的行星，那么海王星有很多的相位，这对于一个灵性导师来说是很再自然不过的。
And I told her at the time that he looked like a very complicated person to me.
What person?
Complicated person.
那时候呢，我就对这位女性说，我说那位上师看起来是一个非常复杂的人。
And she had not shared her fantasy with this guru, with this teacher.
他并没有把他的这种对他的单相思告诉这位老师。
However, she found out, she told me later, that he was having sexual relationships with a number of the women in their group.
但是后来呢，这个女性告诉我，最后她发现这位上师跟他们那个团体的好几位女性都有性关系。
And so she went through a kind of spiritual disillusionment of Neptune in the 8th.
所以说呢，他最后经历了一些灵性上面的这种幻灭，海王星的幻灭。
Okay. Again, this, a dramatic example, but I remember it because of well, there were a lot of reasons actually, but I particularly remember this client, and later there was even a kind of scandal that came out about this particular guru. But let's just say that she naturally had a need for a spiritual connection that was very intimate.
那么我记得这个案例，因为这个女性呢，海王星在第8宫，毫无疑问，她是在亲密关系中，她需要这种灵性的连接。不过呢，这个当然后来这个事情，最后这个上师呢也出了一些丑闻。
And at the time, I told her, I said, even though you are disillusioned now, you need to recognize how much you use kind of spiritual intimacy with a partner.
那么当时我就告诉他，虽然你现在觉得很幻灭，但是呢，你也要意识到，你多么需要在你的伴侣关系中需要包含那个灵性的成分。
And eventually, she did meet, and they married, and she had a very strong spiritual connection with this man.
那么最终呢，她遇到了一个男性，那么他们结婚了，她跟这个男性之间有非常强烈的灵性的连接。
Now I have to say, this particular client had Pisces rising.
那么我不得不提一下，我这个客户呢，他的上升是双鱼座。
And Neptune in the 8 in Libra. She's part of my generation.
那他的海王星是落在了天秤座，他是跟我是一代人。
Right. And yet it still was an expression of Neptune in the 8. What are other questions that stand out to you here, Felicia?
Wait a minute.
About the 8th house. Just grab any of them, doesn't matter. We'll pick some that.
Someone asked which is more important, how to explain the sign on the cusp and the sign inside the 8th house, which is more important?
I think the sign on the cusp is more important. Seems to show up more dramatically, in my experience. But both of them are factors.
那么就是说，刚才有位同学问是宫头星座还是宫内星座哪个更重要？老师说那是宫头星座。根据他的经验，宫头星座它的表达非常更明显，宫头星座更重要。
If you have an intercepted sign in the 8th house, don't ignore that sign. It still expresses itself.
如果你有一个星座是被劫夺在第8宫，你也不要忽视那个星座，它还是在那里。
But the sign on the is still important, very important.
但是不管怎么样，
Even with an intercepted sign.
宫头的星座是最重要的。
For example, if you have the sign Cancer on 8th house cusp, obviously the emotional connection is for intimacy. It's got to be a instinctive emotional connection.
那么比如说你的第8宫宫头是巨蟹座，那么你们这个情绪上的连接，特别是那个本能的这种情绪上的连接，对你的亲密关系是非常非常重要的。
But you could have Cancer on the 8th house cusp and have Leo intercepted in the 8th house.
但是你可能是巨蟹座在八宫宫头，但是呢，狮子座被劫夺在八宫宫内。
There's both the need for an emotional connection for that intimacy, Cancer, but also an attraction to someone who has a certain drama, a certain colorfulness that's Leo.
那么你们两个人之间不仅要有那个情绪上的这种连接，还需要有那种狮子座的品质，就是那种性生活的多姿多彩呀，戏剧化的那个部分。
Okay. Well, there's some other questions that jumped out at you. Because we're going to need to go on to the 9th, 10th, 11th.
Venus in Virgo in 8th house.
Well, this is very selective. This is where Venus expresses itself in wanting some things. It suggests, if we're talking about sex, for example, it means a requirement for a very, very specific ritual.
那么如果是我们把八宫，我们现在就来解释他的性生活方面。如果这个人金星在处女座第八宫，那么他可能需要他性生活有某种仪式感，而且他是一个在性生活面上面是有挑剔性的。他的挑剔是通过金星的挑剔是通过第八宫来表达。
We saw the person in question is the sign on the 8th house. What will turn a man on more than the 5th? And the answer is yes.
那么sorry, the sun's in 8th house, then 5th, right?
The sign on the 8th house will turn a man on more than the sign on the 5th house does. That's correct.
就是说第八宫的星座，就是说让这个人引起他的那个性上面的这种兴奋的，就是第八宫的宫头星座比第5宫宫头星座更重要。
But if it's a woman's chart, Zen and Mars remain very important in terms of the kind of male he attracts.
那么如果这个是女性的星盘的话呢，那么火星对于她所吸引来的男性仍然是非常重要的，太阳和火星。
All right. So
No.
I think we need to move on to the 9th house because we could stay in the 8th house forever. Everyone wants to stay in either the 7th house or the 8th house. No one wants to leave the 8th house.
Okay. 那么就是没有问完的
I'll
问题。
make one more. Yeah.
Okay, please.
Do you need to translate that?
No, please.
All right. The only thing I would say, Felicia, is that yes, also one of the money houses. The 2nd house and the 8th house are money house. Yes, but the 8th house differs because it's borrowed money and partners' money and other people's money and so forth.
那么第八宫，另外一个非常重要的是，第八宫是一个金钱的宫位，它跟第2宫一样，但是不同的是，它是他人的金钱，你借贷的金钱、投资的金钱等等。
Okay. Let's move on now.
虽然大家还有很多问题，但大卫老师必须往下讲了。
After we're married and have sex, we can now be philosophical.
那我们在我们结婚，然后我们又发生了性关系之后，我们都可以成为哲学家了。
Or after we have been married and then transformed, 8th house, died and been reborn, we can be philosophical.
或者是说，当我们转化了自己， 我们就变得更哲学性了。
And the ninth house is all about the higher mind.
那么第9宫都是跟我们高等心智连接在一起的。
Concepts and conceptual thinking, everything that has to do with our grasp of the big picture.
那么那些概念、观念化的思考，这些都跟我们的大局观，我们看到的大局，更大的画面连接在一起。
You know, when we talked about the third house, we talked about it in terms of elementary school, our neighborhood, things we learned in our backyard growing up.
那么我们谈第3宫的时候，我们谈到了小学、我们的邻里、我们成长就是童年成长的时候发生的事情。
But in the ninth house, we go off to college, we go off to the university.
那么当到第9宫的时候呢，我们就到了大学，去上大学了。
We join the world.
我们走出了家门，我们参与到世界之中。
We learn what the rest of the world thinks.
我们知道了世界其他人是怎么想的。
We come out of the limits of our own neighborhood, our own backyard, and experience all of the neighborhoods of the whole world.
我们是从我们自己的后院走了出来，去体验就是这个世界的所有的这些后院。
In the third house, we just travel in the neighborhood to the store. But in the ninth house, we travel long distance.
那么第3宫的时候呢，我们可能就是到邻居家串门，但是到了九宫，那可是一个我们要去长途旅行的宫位了。
The ninth house is the big journey, isn't it? The long journey.
第9宫是一个很大的旅程，是一个很长的旅程。
Now, that also has to do with your belief system in terms of your principles, but also the principles of society to some extent.
那么它
The
也
higher courts, legal precedents for him.
那么它也和你的原则原则相关，还有更大的世界的原则，比如说这个高等法院，这些。
It's so funny, Felicia. Whenever I switch from the 8th to the 9th, everybody gets really quiet.
很有趣，每当我们从第8宫讲到第9宫，就没人问问题了，一下就很安静。
Well, I'm still back to thinking about the 8th house, I'm sure.
大家还是在想着第8宫的事吗？
Yeah. Is there a 9th house question there?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay. So someone might ask the question, can I tell which college or university I'm going to attend or my child is going to attend by looking at their ninth house?
那有人问这个问题，我如果看其他人的星图，看他们的9宫，我能不能说出这个孩子将来会去哪个大学呢？
No, the ninth house will not say Peking University.
当然，我们不能看着第8宫就说，哦，你这个孩子会去上北京大学。
Yes, I'm looking at your ninth house of your child and it says Peking University.
你会说，哎，是的，我看你孩子的星图，我看到了北京大学。
No, but the ninth house can tell you some things about your higher education.
就是星图上看不了你到底去上哪个大学，但是呢，星图可以告诉你，给出一些关于你的高等教育的一些信息。
You know, if you have a Jupiter in the ninth house, does it mean you're absolutely going to?
比如说，你的木星落在第九宫，并不意味着你必然的要去上大学。
Not necessarily, no, but it helps. It may suggest some benefits with education. Yeah.
但是呢，这木星落在第九宫，对你能上大学毫无疑问是有帮助的。
Quite frankly, even Jupiter in the third house can be sometimes an indication of scholarships, because it's Jupiter. Third or the ninth are education houses.
其实坦白的说，即便是木星落在三宫，可能也意味着你能够获得奖学金，跟木星在第九宫是相似的。毕竟它是木星。
If you have Saturn in the ninth, does it mean obstacles with education?
如果你的土星落在第九宫，并不意味着就是在教育上面一定会有非常多的阻碍。
But maybe not. It could also mean serious sense of duty, responsibility, the need to prove oneself in terms of higher education.
就是说，它可能是土星落在第九宫会是一些阻碍，但同时也可能意味着，就是说高等教育来说对你是非常非常重要的。你觉得有义务
Whatever planets you have in the ninth. Sorry. Did you?
Okay, please.
Whatever planets you have in the ninth house may even tell you what you study, issues that you have in terms of travel, but also things that affect your concept of life.
那么第九宫所落的行星，可能会是跟你的旅行议题或者是你的教育议题联系在一起。但不管怎么样，它是说你对于生命的这种概念的关系。
Remember, the ninth house has a lot to do with. Remember this. Here's what I want to say, Felicia. All of the houses will tell us a little bit more about where things might develop, the place that they might develop. See?
那么所有的宫位都告诉我们，这个事情可能是在哪个领域获得发展。
The ninth house might suggest, if it's very prominent in the chart, that someone lives or works at a university. Perhaps they spend a lot of time, at some.
Hello? Hello?
As a teacher. Yes. Did you? I'm right here. I haven't done anything different.
Okay. Could you say the whole sentence again? I lost you.
Sure. All I'm saying is that if there were a lot of planets in the ninth house, it was very prominent in some way. Someone might work in a university. They might be a professor, or they might work for a college or university in some capacity.
那么，如果一个人的九宫里面落了很多的行星的话，那可能他甚至说可能他在大学工作，他没准是个教授，或者是怎么样的职位。
I had one client who had Venus in the ninth house.
我有个客户，他的金星落在9宫。
And she taught at a what's called school. She was a teacher at a beauty school.
那么他是一位在美容学校的老师。
This was a school that taught how to do hair and makeup, things of this.
那这个学校教怎么样剪头发，等等这类跟美容相关的。
Just one little example.
这是一个小例子。
Okay. Let's see what else is Venus in the next year.
Yes, when the student have friends, Venus is nice, and he always travel to other countries.
Does he make a living from traveling? Does he make money from traveling? Or does he just love to travel?
对，这位他的好友在9宫，金星在9宫，就是老是背着包到处旅行。老师问，他从旅行里面赚到钱了吗？
And in fact, that's another good point to make. The ninth house can be related to the travel industry or someone who is in the import-export industry.
那么第9宫是一个可能这个人会被旅游业所吸引，有时候甚至是进出口行业。
Pluto in the house would certainly mean, number one, that you like concepts that help you to survive in some way. Concepts that is like a knowledge to pass on.
那么冥王星到第9宫，它比方说其中的一个含义是你喜欢那种能够帮你生存技巧的这样的知识。那么另外一个意思是你希望一些你的知识要能够传递给后代，这都是两种可能
In terms of
的解读。
In terms of danger, as far as travel, have not seen Pluto being in any cases that I've got as being a problem or a danger in terms of travel. I know you would think it would be, but I haven't seen that. And I have clients who travel a lot, so I haven't seen it. Go ahead. Hello.
这位同学问，冥王星在第9宫是不是意味着在旅行中有危险呢？会有问题？老师说没有，他有一个客户就是这样的配置。So you mean that Pluto in that house doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous to travel, right?
Well, what you're going to learn, no, it doesn't. What you're going to learn is that eventually you'll have to learn the aspect, which will tell you a little bit more about the way that Pluto might be expressed in your lives. But in a general sense, no. I mean, it's not. And I'll give you an example of that.
那么最终呢，大家都会学到相位。那时候看相位呢，你就也能够更清楚的知道这个冥王星它的表达的是会怎样表达。一般来说，冥王在第9宫并不意味着旅行又会有危险。老师给大家举个例子。
Now, for example, I was born with Saturn in the 9th house.
比如说，戴维老师他的出生图上土星在第9宫。
And the old books say caution and danger for travel.
那么老 老旧的教科书上就是说旅行很危险，要警惕。
And I've never had any problems with travel and love travel. And of course, I have a lot of Sagittarius in my chart, which
但是呢，
perhaps
实际上
compensates for that a little.
我旅行的时候没有出什么问题，我喜欢旅行。当然了，是因为我有这么多射手座的元素，也可能这个射手座的元素弥补了吧。
Now, Saturn in the ninth house, meaning for work, could involve travel.
那么，比方说土星在9宫，它可以这样一种表达，就是你的工作是跟旅行是有关联的，或者是你在旅行中工作。
Or it might imply, as in my case, that when you are older, which is Saturn is about maturity, that when you are older or later in life, that you might work in a foreign country.
那么，因为土星是跟我们年纪大了，我们年长相关，那这个组合的另外一种表达可能是，当你年纪更大的时候啊，你年老的时候，或者是你可能会在另外一个国家工作。
All right. All right. Let's move to the 10th house.
下面我们讲一讲第10宫。
The 10th house, again, one of these angular houses, very visible, very prominent.
那么第10宫呢，又是一个就是轴点的宫位了，4轴的宫位，非常的明显，非常的显著。
The 10th house is our public entity.
那么第10宫呢，是我们的公众的身份感，我们的公众的身份。
Especially as relates to our reputation, our career and reputation.
特别是它跟我们的声誉，我们在职业上的地位，我们的声誉相关。
Now, there is a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between the ascendant and the midheaven?
那很多同学问，那么上升点和中天有什么不同呢？
Because after all, people will say the ascendant has a lot to do with how you look and how you appear.
那么毕竟人们会说，上升点是和你看上去的样子，你看起来的你的外貌是联系在一起的。
And that's true.
没错，这是确实是对的。
However, the 10th house has more to do with your relationship with the public, your relationship with your career, your outer goals and aspirations in public life.
不过呢，10宫是和你和公众的关系，它表达了你和公众的关系，还有你的外在你的在职业中的外在的目标，你的期望，这是10宫的意义。
Many times you may have a public perception of someone, but when you meet the person face to face, you will have a different experience.
那么很多时候，你可能对一个人物，你觉得，哎，他在公众，对他好像他的公众印象是这样的，但是你跟他个人，就是说跟他面对面的相见的时候呢，你对他的感觉是完全不同的。
This became very obvious to me when I lived in Los Angeles, worked with a lot of people in the film business.
那么当我在洛杉矶 我当时跟很多在电影界的人士打交道的时候呢，这个是再明显不过了。
Many times when I would meet someone who I had seen on the big screen and who had a kind of public reputation, I was always surprised how different this individual was when you would meet them face to face.
那么很多次，当我看到一个电影界一个演员的时候，他们以公众的形象和他们当你跟他面对面见面时那种感觉是非常的不同。
And that's the difference between the ascendant and the midheaven.
这就是上升点和中间的不同。
When I met Angelina Jolie, I thought she was going to be this very strong, dynamic individual.
比如说，当我见安吉丽娜·朱莉的时候，本来我会想她是一个非常有活力的、非常强壮的女性。
Because she has Aries up there on the midheaven, Aries at the top of the chart.
因为她的上升是她的中天是白羊座。
But her rising is Cancer.
但是实际上她的上升是巨蟹座。
So when I met her, she seemed very shy.
所以说，当我见她的时候，她看上去特别的羞涩。
And even vulnerable.
甚至看起来有些脆弱。
Much more even seemingly insecure on the face-to-face level.
就是当我们面对面的时候，他甚至看起来感觉到很不安全，就是有很强的不安全感，有一些不安全感。
This is again the difference between the heaven and the ascendant. So I want you to understand this because some people get confused by this.
因为有人会迷惑一宫和十宫的不同，那刚才解释了一下。
Remember, the 10th house defines your status.
What?
The 10th defines your career status. It defines it.
第十宫呢，它定义了你的职业上的你的职业地位。
However, the 6th house describes the day-to-day routine of your work.
但是呢，第六宫它定义了你每天的日常的工作。
And in fact, the key vocational houses are the 2nd house, the 6th house, and the 10th house.
实际上，关键的职业宫位是2宫、6宫、10宫。
Because the 2nd house is where you can make money, and the 6th house describes the nature of your job and your day-to-day routine, and the 10th house are your goals and your aspirations professionally. And
那么，因为第2宫是
your title. What is your title?
描述了你是怎么赚钱的。第6宫呢，描述了你的每日的日常工作是什么。第10宫呢，描述了你的职业地位、你的头衔是什么。所以这3个宫连在一起呢，像我们，你可以从它们看到职业的线索。
Interesting questions there about the 10th house.
There are some questions.
You tell me which one you think is interesting.
Someone asked her 10th house is Cancer, so she said will be a housewife, stay at home.
I don't know. Does she want to be a housewife and stay at home? She should ask herself that question.
有位同学问他的10宫是巨蟹，那是不是意味着他要做家庭主妇，待在家里呢？老师说这个问题你应该问你自己，你想做一个家庭主妇吗？
You know, Cancer on the 10th house could be being in a career or profession that will nurture others in some way, nurture people in some way.
那么巨蟹在十宫，你其实可以在一个能够滋养他人的行业中。
Yes, if a man has Venus conjunct the midheaven, he might be attracted to a partner that is a career woman. This is quite likely.
另外呢，比如说一个人他的金星合向了中间，那可能他会被那个职业女性所吸引。
Hello?
Hello?
Did you hear what I said?
Yes, I just translated it.
I can't hear. Okay, I couldn't hear you at all.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I'm right here. I can hear you now. Yes, but I didn't hear you for a minute. It was all blank. Okay. All right. So you translated what I said about Venus conjunct the midheaven, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Do you see any other questions there before we go on?
If 6th house and 10th house are empty house, does that mean no relation with the job?
No. Just like an empty 8th house does not mean that you will not die.
那么空宫
Look,
并
my 8th house is empty. I won't die.
空宫并不意味着你跟什么没有缘分，就像你如果是8宫是空的，不意味着你就不会死。
No. Just look at sign on that house cusp.
你就看一看那个宫头的星座。
For example, I have Libra on the, and my job, my career is a counseling career. Astrology, I work as a consultant, which is very much a one-to-one interaction with other people.
那比如说戴维老师他的10宫宫头是天秤座，所以说他是作为咨询师，他的职业是咨询师，他给别人做1对1的咨询。
And I have Gemini on the 6th house cusp.
那么他的6宫是宫头是双子座。
And so what describes the day-to-day routine for me?
所以说什么能够描述了他的日常工作呢？
I do 2 things. I talk with people and I write. I write and I talk.
那么
all day.
大卫老师说他有2件事，一个是他要跟人谈话，第二个是他要写东西，这是双子座在6宫的2个表现。
And in fact, my major in college was journalism.
那么他的大学主修的是新闻。
I have Mercury conjunct Venus conjunct the midheaven.
那么他的水星合向金星合向中天。
What I really loved to do as a journalist was to interview people.
那么当他做记者的时候，他最喜欢做的事情就是采访别人。
That's what attracted me, was writing the story and doing the interview.
那么那个是吸引他的，就是写故事，然后做采访。
Yes, which is Gemini on the 6th house, Libra on the 10th.
这就是第6宫宫头是双子座，第10宫宫头是天秤座的一个例子。
But I did not become a juror or reporter. I became a counselor.
You don't become what?
I did not become a journalist. I did not become a reporter.
Okay.
I became eventually a counselor.
但是呢，最终呢，大卫老师没有做 记者，那最终还是做了占星师。Someone asked, would you look at the depositor of the houses?
We'll discuss in the intermediate class more about the dispositor chain. The dispositor chain is very important.
那么刚才有位同学问要不要看公主星，老师说，那么我们会在中介课程来看公主星，还有那个公主星的链条，公主星是非常重要的。
The ruler of the house is really the dispositor of the house, but it's not the final dispositor. And that's a whole another intermediate level of astrology.
那么公主星呢，它就是说不是整个星盘的定位星，不过那是另外一个话题了。
Remember, everything in a chart is vibration. Everything in astrology is resonates. See, so these dispositors are part of that resonance.
要记得，星盘中的一切都是振动，都是关于共振。所以说呢，这个公主星呢，也是跟共振相关的。
11th house.
那现在我们来讲11宫。
After you've achieved everything and established your career, now you have your friends, time to spend with friends, your acquaintances, your affiliations, your circle of people. This is the 11th house.
在你创建了你获得了成就，你获得了你的职业地位之后呢，那你就开始跟你的朋友们打成一片了，这就是11宫。
And so the 11th house has a lot to do with the use of participation in terms of groups, in teams. How well do you do in teams or groups?
那么所以说11宫是和你参与到组织、参与到集体中、参与到团体中相关啊，你和团体这些人在一起做什么？
Some people might say, oh, I have 3 planets in the 11th house. I hate groups. I hate teams.
有人可能说，哦，我11宫有3颗星，但是我讨厌团体，我讨厌团队。
Well, of course, because you have issues about acceptance.
当然了，这很自然，因为你对于接纳是有议题的。
To understand the 11th house, it's very important to understand that it's about group and team dynamics, particularly in terms of acceptance
那么
and
了解
participation.
11宫对团体来说是非常重要的，因为这就是它跟于你跟团体之间的关系，还有团队的动力。
I see the question about Stephen Arroyo in the 11th is personal hope. And I'll answer that question. Go ahead.
那么这位同学问，阿诺优说11宫对于一个非常重要的意义是个人的希望，是这样吗？
I think in some ways we live, I don't know if you can translate this word, Felicia, but we live vicariously through our friends. Do you know what the word vicarious means?
I need to check the dictionary. Vicarious.
That's okay. Don't check. Don't check. I'll get no. Don't check. I'll give a better. Meaning, a lot of times, our friends will do things that we would like to do, and we will live through our friends.
那么我觉得呢，我们常常是通过我们的朋友来生活的。我们朋友做的事情呢，是我们想去做的。
Or our friends, because they do something that we want to do, encourages us to do that as well.
那么有时候，因为我们的朋友做了我们想做的事情， 所以说他们也鼓励我们也去做。
So when Stephen Arroyo is talking about hopes and wishes, he's referring, I think, to that sense of the hopes and wishes that we share with our circle of friends, you know?
所以说
I think that's really what it's about.
Steven 阿诺优谈到这个希望的时候，我觉得这是我和我们的朋友分享的这种愿望和期望。
Yes, if you have Uranus in the 11th house and you have Uranus aspecting Venus, you might have a very unusual assortment of friends, very unusual people.
没错，如果你的天王星在11宫4分金星的话，你是会有那些非常不同寻常的朋友。你会有
If you have Mars, if you have Mars in the 11th house, you may have friends who are in the military, friends who are in sports, friends, you may participate in a sports group, anything that would represent Mars, for example.
比如说你的火星落在11宫，可能你有朋友是在军队，你有朋友是运动员，你的朋友是你在就是做体育运动的时候认识的等等，就是所有火星所代表的那一切的意思。
Pluto in the 11th house does not usually mean a lot of changes with friends.
那么冥王星在11
It's not
宫
really the theme for Pluto.
并不意味着你和朋友之间有很多的 exchanges，have a lot of exchanges with friends。
Yes, no, changes, meaning someone asked the question, they said, Pluto in the 11th house, does that mean friends are frequently changing? What they really meant.
这位同学问，如果
The
冥王
answer
星在
is no. The answer is no.
是不是意味着朋友老是换来换去的？老师的回答是并非如此。
Now, Pluto in the 11th house is much more about power battles with friends, control issues with friends.
那么冥王星在11宫意味着你和你朋友之间的权力斗争，还有你的控制的这个议题。
Right. The 11th house might also have a lot to do with the kind of clubs and organizations that you belong to as well.
11宫也是代表着你所属于的这个俱乐部或者是这个组织。
If you have Pisces in the 11th house, it might mean that you belong to groups that are either spiritual groups or creative groups. You might have a lot of friends who are musicians or filmmakers.
那么如果是你的11宫是双鱼座的话，你可能你的朋友有很多的艺术家的朋友，他们是音乐家，等等，或者是你在一个yes.
Do you see any interesting questions there about the 11th house before we go on to the 12th?
Somebody says she has a 11th house. It's an empty house in Gemini, and she has a lot of friends that is athletes and also the national level athletes.
It probably where is her Mercury?
那么这位朋友他说他的11宫是双子座，但是空宫他身边很多朋友是国家级的运动员，那你的水星是落在哪里呢？
She going to tell us?
Leo.
Leo. Okay. So again, there's a certain amount of drama there. But I would say, you know what I would look for? I would look to see how Mercury, this is more advanced, how Mercury is aspected and where Mars is in the chart.
那么可能需要看一看，你这个水星的相位，还有火星是落在哪里。
Because the 11th house is not the only indicator in term groups. The whole chart, or even Venus, for example, is important in terms of social life.
因为并不是只看11宫知道我们的朋友是什么样的，那因为我们整个星图都在描述我们的社交生活，比方说金星也跟我们的社交生活联系在一起。
Oh, there's a question. What about 11th house?
12th house?
What's that?
12th house. Do you have time? Are you going to finish?
Yes,
So I think
sure
maybe
am. Yes.
move
I'll
on.
go ahead and do
It's
that now.
4 minutes.
I know. Such a Scorpio. Such a 6th house Scorpio. All right. 12th house. 12th house is the unconscious, the awakening conscious, the most sensitive issues in our lives are in the 12th house.
12宫是我们的无意识，是我们正在唤醒的意识，还有我们生活中最敏感的事情。
You know, a lot of times, the sign on the 12th house cusp will be a sign that comes before the sign on the ascendant.
因为在
Not all.
很常见的12宫公头的星座是我们在上升星座之前的那个星座。
For example, someone might have Leo rising, but Cancer on the 12th house cusp.
那比如说，有人他的上升是狮子座，但是12宫公头呢是巨蟹座。
And so, in many ways, we can understand the ascendant by understanding the sign on that 12th house cusp.
很多情况下，如果我们理解了12宫公头的星座，我们可能更好的理解这个上升点。
Leo on the ascendant is very take charge, very dramatic.
那么上升点的狮子座是非常的，他要主导事情，而且他是非常戏剧化的。
You would not think Leo on the ascendant as being someone that is emotionally vulnerable.
你不会觉得一个上升狮子的人，他在情感上面是一个很脆弱的人。
But that Cancer on the 12th house tells you that they are.
但是呢，12宫公头的巨蟹座告诉你，他实际上是有这种脆弱性在的。
Whatever sun is on the 12th house cusp is an issue that we are very, very sensitive about.
那么不论12宫公头是什么样的星座呢，那这个星座的所代表的议题都是我们非常非常敏感的议题。
Whatever planets we have in the 12th house correspond to the things we are very sensitive about.
那么不论你的12宫公头，是落12宫宫内落着什么行星，这些行星的意思也是我们对就是非常非常敏感的，对行星代表的议题是非常非常敏感的。
I had a client yesterday with the moon in Leo in the 12th house.
那么我昨天有个客户，月亮在狮子座，在12宫。
And described his relationship with his mother during the first 5 years of his life as being very blissful, very he had her undivided attention, and it was like being in heaven.
那么他描述，在他5岁之前，他和他母亲的关系非常的亲密，他母亲把全部的这种注意力都投在他身上，他感觉就像在天堂一样。
But she gave birth to his brother, and all the attention went to more of the attention went to the brother.
但是后来他母亲又给他生了个小弟弟，他母亲的注意力又都被小弟弟吸引了，大部分注意力。
Which created a lot of inner conflicts for him.
那么这个也给他内在他造成了非常多的矛盾，非常多的纠结。
But he had a kind of spiritual relationship with his mother. He saw her as a kind of spiritual teacher.
但是呢，他和他母亲之间呢有这种灵性的这样的连接，他认为他的母亲是一个灵性导师，对他而言。
Now I too have the moon in the 12th house, but in Sagittarius.
那么大卫老师说，他的月亮呢确实也在12宫，不过在射手座。
And my mother was a kind of spiritual teacher.
What?
And my mother was a kind of spiritual teacher.
那么大卫老师说，他的母亲呢也是某种意味上的灵性老师。
My mother also invalid. She was in a wheelchair, which is
而且
12th
呢，
house.
他这12宫哈，还有一个是他的月亮，大卫老师月亮在12宫啊，一个是12宫射手座灵性的老师，另外呢，他的母亲一直是瘫痪的，一直在坐着轮椅，这也是12宫的一个表现。
But the 12th house, if you have personal planets, and when I say personal planets, you know I mean Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars in the 12th house, you have access to spiritual or mystical experiences.
那如果是你的12宫内若有个人行星，实际上呢，你就有倾向去经历一些神秘的这样一个经历，更有可能有这种神秘的经历。
Shemitah, that's mystery, huh?
Yes.
Mystical, Shemitah, okay. It's almost mystical, not quite. Mysterious. I can see it doesn't translate exactly. Yeah. The 12th house is also associated in the mundane world, of course, with hospitals, prisons, monasteries, places of retreat, temples, sanctuaries.
那12宫呢，在那个世俗的层面呢，是和那些比如说病院呐、精神病院呀、医院呐、灵性圣地呀、这种隐居所呀、这些联系在一起。
If you have Uranus
还有寺院啊等等，监狱。
house,
如果你天王星在12宫，
it might mean that chaos, things happen suddenly, can awaken you on a spiritual or mystical level.
那么可能有一些混乱，它可能会突然的在灵性的层面唤起你生命中经历的这种混乱，突然在灵性层面中唤醒你。
Or it might mean that you have sensitivity, a lot of sensitivity to chaos.
或者是你对于这种混乱特别的敏感，混乱的状况特别敏感。
So, planets, the planetary energy can be suppressed in 12th house.
而且这种在12宫的行星的这种能量可能会被压抑。
Mars in the 12th house can mean someone who expresses
比方说，如果一个人火星落在12宫，可能是他压抑了他的愤怒。
The 12th house is a very important house, I think.
12宫是一个非常重要的宫位。
It's really an almost overlooked house in some ways.
从某种角度来说，它也是一个被忽视了的宫位。
If for anyone that has spiritual questions, the 12th house is very important. Whether it's the sun, or cusp, or any planets in that house.
你有灵性上的问题，那12宫是非常非常重要的。12宫宫内的行星、12宫宫头的星座等等，都对了解12宫非常重要，对你的灵性生活非常重要。
The 12th house is your connection to the masses, to what we call the collective.
12宫也是我们和那种集体意识连接的宫位，你和大众连接的宫位。
Right. Neptune in the 12th house is in its own house.
海王星落在12宫，海王星就落在了自己的宫位了。
And so there the need for spiritual nurturing is very obvious.
所以说他们需要那种
spiritual experience.
灵性的经历，灵性的这种滋养是非常非常重要的，对这些人而言。
Now, I want you to study these examples I've given you that show sun in a sign in a house. Now, you're having to learn to think of sun, sign, and house. We're going to go over these next time.
那么现在大家学了宫位了，可以去想一想这个行星落在星座落在宫位这个组合的解读。我们下周课来看，大家可以下去看一下这些资料。
If you have Venus, the Sun, and Mercury all in Libra in the 12th house, you have the potential to be a spiritual consultant, someone that others will come to confide in. It's very good for a therapist, by the way. Very good for a therapist.
如果你的金星、太阳、水星都落在天秤座12宫的话呢，你是有很好的潜力做一个灵性老师、灵性咨询师的。他们会一些人会愿意把他们的秘密向你吐露给你。
I want you to see the key words with these examples, okay? And really see how these things express themselves. This is very important.
希望大家看这个例子的时候要看那个关键词，看看这些关键词怎么样表达它，这些行星是怎么样表达出自己的。
Flora has a question. Let's see what Flora wants to.
When we interpret every houses, do we need to take into account of the cusp, sign on the cusp and the sign inside? Should we integrate it?
If this, I think there's more integration necessary if there's an interception, but in general, the sign on the cusp is the most important.
He said that we need to integrate the interpretation of the two signs.
I answered that, meaning not so much unless there's an intercepted sign in that house. In other words,
so mainly interpret.
If you have Sag, it's
so
the main thing. The sign of the cusp.
Okay.
Listen to me, please. The main sign on the cusp. If there is an interception, then the sign that's intercepted is important to integrate. But it's still, even with an interception, the sign on the cusp is the most important.
那么 解读每个宫位的时候，星头的星座是最重要的。如果是宫内有一个被劫夺的星座，那这个劫夺的星座也是重要的。但是即便是有劫夺的星座的话，仍然是宫头所落星座是最重要的。
You know, we see examples of this all the time, don't we? Someone might have Cancer rising, but their moon is in Sagittarius.
那么我们常常能见到这种情况，比方说一个人他的月亮是他上升是巨蟹座，但是这个人的月亮是在射手座，也就是他的公主星落在射手座。
Right. And so even though they're still a Cancer rising and they have a moody quality to their personality, it has a Sagittarius feel because the moon, the ruling body associated, is in Sagittarius.
那也就是说，这个人你要看他的公主星，虽然说他上升是巨蟹座，他是有些羞涩的，但是他的月亮是落到射手座，所以说呢 ，the moon in the Sagittarius, so they are what did you say? I'm sorry.
Okay. For example, they would tend to be more optimistic, have a greater sense of humor.
那这个人呢，他可能是更乐观，他有非常多的幽默感。虽然说上升是巨蟹座，但是月亮在射手座，就会把这个射手座的元素加入进来。
See, so this is how you begin to recognize these things. You know, one Cancer rising is going to be different than another Cancer rising, depending on the moon signs.
所以说，这就是大家能够把这些不同的东西加进来。大家虽然说全部都是上升巨蟹座的人，但是因为他们月亮所落的星座不同，你外表上看起来这个人的表现也是不同的。
You might have someone with Cancer rising and the moon in Gemini, and they're fairly talkative.
那也许有一个人，他的月亮是上升是他的上升是巨蟹座，但他的月亮落在了双子座，他可能是一个非常喜欢聊天的人。
And you might say, wow, you know, they don't seem exactly like Cancer.
那你可能会
because they are more communicative.
说他们看起来不像上升巨蟹座的人，因为他们好像是很容易交流，很喜欢交流。
So this is why you've got to pay attention to the planet that is either you can call it the ruling planet or you can call it the dispositing planet, the planet that disposits that cause. You need to pay attention to it. It's important.
你应该看一下公主星，这个是非常重要的，你要注意那一点。
And this is especially true when that house is empty, when there's no planets in that house.
特别是如果一个宫是空宫的话，那它的公主星就更重要了。
Okay. All right. So I want you to study these between next webinar when I'll be there. I'll be in Beijing for next BAP. I'll be jet lagged, but I'll be there.
去研习一下这个课堂资料。那么下一周呢，大卫老师来了，就是这个公主星和公头星座是不一样的。
So I expect you to study these combinations, you know.
请大家去学习一下这个行星。
Good to study.
Day up.
All right. Day up. That's it. Good to study. Day up. Okay. All right.
好好学习，天天向上。
Yes. I'm sorry that the internet is not as good. It seems like some people say the internet is a little shaky today, and I'm sorry that it was. It seems fine here.
Yeah.
I hear you very clearly, and it all looks very clear. I don't know why it's not clear there.
I cannot hear you clearly sometime today.
I see. All right. Hopefully I'll get my new computer fixed.
Okay. Bye.
I really struggle with that. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
再见. Bye-bye.
再见.
Bye.